Welcome to episode 2 of Mistwind, my solo D&D campaign, where we explore the adventures of Eleanor, Thorne, and Charles Aefir Wentworth. So make sure you've watched episode 1, because if you haven't, then you're gonna be pretty confused. Anyway, last we left off, Eleanor almost got run over by a carriage. In that wreckage, she found an injured Augusta and an unconscious Caroline. Conveniently, Charles, her best friend, was close by during his walk and was able to quickly bring Augusta to his house, where a mysterious Dr. Hazelby casted Cure Wounds to save Augusta and expose magic to Charles. And I know that was a cliffhanger, but we're gonna continue off with Eleanor, who Charles just kinda left behind to deal with an unconscious Caroline, and she was like, what am I supposed to do? Eleanor starts asking around for anyone who can help her. But let me remind you that she is still indeed dressed in her dad's clothes, which she stole last episode. So people are kind of going like, who is this person? Why are they dressed like that? Their clothes fit them horribly. And so that's what people are thinking, at least the ones who are kind of like dumb enough to fall for her pretty mediocre disguise. But she's asking around, and one man actually steps up. He has medium-length, shaggy hair and a bit of a rugged look to him. Think Cole Cassidy from Overwatch. He says that he was out walking his horse, named, oh god, this is me realizing that I never came up with a name for the horse. Banana. The horse's name is Banana. So this guy tells her she can borrow Banana to take Caroline to the Duke's house. And he's like, she's a sturdy one. Banana can hold you both. Which I know is also not very realistic for a horse, but who cares, it's D&D. And Eleanor graciously accepts his offer, and he even helps her get Caroline's unconscious body onto Banana. I've committed to this now. This horse is named Banana. And instead of helping Eleanor get onto the horse, he just kind of steps back as she hoists herself up. So as Eleanor grabs the reins, he tells her, do me a favor, Miss Thorne. Tell your mother that Harrison aided you. And Eleanor is like, huh? But before she can question him, he gently pats Banana, signaling her to go. And Banana starts to get on her way. And Banana is a girl. Yeah, I decided right now. And Eleanor is so confused in this moment because she's thinking, how did he recognize me? My disguise was so good. So she's wondering this during the ride to Wentworth House, and as she's driving Banana, she is steering this horse through the streets pretty hectically. She's not a very gracious horse rider. And as she's doing this, Caroline's like unconscious body is kind of just flopping on it, you know? But she also starts to think about that jolt of something that she felt back at the wreckage. Something evil, something bad. And her mind wanders to a place that she had been avoiding for years. She needs to talk to her dad. What if he was right this entire time, and society ridiculed him for it? And deep down, Eleanor knows that she agreed with them. She never really outright made fun of him the way that everyone else did, but despite loving her dad, she did doubt him, and she didn't believe him. So Eleanor is thinking all of this, and these thoughts are getting pretty deep. She's lost in them. But in that moment, Caroline suddenly awakens. She gasps, confused and frantic, and she is like, what is going on? The carriage? Oh my god, where am I? And Eleanor tries to calm her down, like, yo, chill. And she starts to explain the situation. So your carriage broke, and Duke Longford took your sister to Wentworth House. We're going there, and Caroline just goes like, you, and she points her finger at her. Why is it always you? And Eleanor is like, what do you mean? What do you mean it's always me? And then Caroline kind of blankly stares at her all of a sudden, and she's like, wait, what are you wearing? And Eleanor just kind of shrugs, remembering that she's wearing her dad's clothes. And she just tells her, you know, I just kind of felt like changing my fashion today. And Caroline just kind of scoffs in disapproval. At this point, because of Eleanor's reputation, this is really not that much of a surprise to her. She hears that, she kind of takes in her surroundings, and as they're on this horse, Banana, I kind of love Banana already, I'm not gonna lie. She finally digests what Eleanor has just said about her sister, and she asks what happened to Augusta. And Eleanor decides it's best to be honest. And she tells her, so she was injured. And Caroline just kind of stares at her again for a moment, and then Eleanor sees it. The tears start to well up in Caroline's eyes, and she definitely feels bad for her. But even in this moment of pity for this girl who has just found out that her sister is injured, her mind still keeps wandering back to the question that she was thinking of earlier. What was at the carriage? What was it that she felt? So they finally arrive at Wentworth House, where Eleanor drops off a weeping Caroline. They enter the foyer, or however you say it, and they see drops of blood that have now stained the floor. The servants are doing their best to clean it up, but Caroline sees the blood through her tears, and her weeping turns into full-blown ugly sobbing. Charles's butler, I don't really have a name yet, tells her that His Grace the Duke of Longford is in the drawing room, and Eleanor tells them to take Caroline to him. But instead of staying to ensure that both of the sisters are safe, she unwisely decides to leave. She takes Banana and heads back to her own house. Today's sponsor is Unvale. I've been using Unvale to post the lore, world build, and characters of Mistwind. Over there you can see the king and queen of Mistwind, and also some extra stuff about the world, like a written version of Eleanor and Frederick's backstory. There's also some entries about the Flying Elf Inn, which is an inn and tavern which might make an appearance in the story in the future, so if you're interested in that, go check it out on Unvale. I've always wanted to share stuff about that part of Mistwind, and I didn't really know how to do it or where to do it because it's just in written form, and it's really refreshing to be able to just post that on Unvale and not have to worry too much about the format of it. So Unvale is a place made by creatives for creatives. It's an AI-free community, which is a breath of fresh air these days, and it's generally just a nice community, and it's a great place to organize your world and characters because it's free. You don't need an invite, you don't need to pay for anything. So please go check it out to see if the website is up your alley. So once again, thank you Unvale for sponsoring this video. So from there, we move on to the cliffhanger from the last episode, where Charles witnessed healing magic being cast on Augusta. He is shocked, mouth agape, and his words finally come back to him, and he says, "What are you doing?" And Dr. Hazelby is super focused right now, but still looks up at Charles and kind of sassily tells him, "I told you to forget everything you think you know. So, if you didn't already catch on to the obvious, this is magic. You're not a doctor, are you? What exactly are you doing to her?" Charles interrupts him, and Hazelby just kind of rolls his eyes, still very sassily. "I'm healing her, obviously. What else does it look like? Do you think I'm harming her?" And Charles is just like, I don't know what to think. So he is just standing there pretty unsure what to do, because this is a pretty overwhelming situation. He's covered in blood. He's witnessing something he doesn't even know what. And he just stands there and watches the doctor for a moment. And he notices that Augusta's wound has actually stopped bleeding. And he feels fear. Charles is not a curious soul like Eleanor is. He's kind of afraid of the unknown. He's kind of thinking to himself, now what? Magic? has been added into the equation. Who knows what this Dr. Hazelby is capable of doing to me if I anger him. So even though he is lost in his thoughts, he does still succeed on a perception check to hear Dr. Hazelby kind of shaking his head and murmuring under his breath. See, this is the problem with a non-magical society. So many deaths could have been prevented if only they would allow at least healing magic here. And Charles is like, huh? What? And Hazelby looks up at him and actually begins to explain. I am performing what is called evocation. Evocation? What, like in those fantasy books? Hazelby rolls his eyes again. I told you to forget what you think you know. You're already seeing what I'm doing. Do you really think that this is still fantasy? And Charles is like, so this is magic. Obviously. Charles is kind of, once again, just dumbfounded. And he is standing there just staring at the glow of the healing in awe. And it's almost hypnotic seeing something like this for the first time. And he succeeds on an insight check. And he notices that the doctor's expression has turned grim. And he asks, what's happening? Is something wrong? And Dr. Hazelby just says, my good man, I'm gonna be frank. Her injuries are pretty severe. I need to focus on healing her, and I can't expend any energy explaining more magic to you. So in this moment, you just need to accept what you're witnessing is real. You can decide whether or not to believe it. But either way, I'm going to be doing whatever I can to save her. And you can either stay and watch or step outside without disturbing me. And Charles thinks back and remembers his moment of panic and desperation while carrying her body and how he felt like there was nothing he could do. And so he decides he needs to let this person do what they're doing. And he, without speaking, he leaves the room, just standing outside the door. Sooner or later, a servant comes and informs him that Miss Thorne has arrived with Lady Caroline. And he goes over there and sees Caroline weeping alone. Where is Miss Thorne? He asks the servants. And they're just like, she left. She said she had other things to attend to and said that you would handle everything. And Charles is a little taken aback, like offended, understandably annoyed that she left and didn't even go to check up on how Augusta was doing. And he feels himself getting actually a little angry. But Charles sighs, sets that anger aside for now because he knows she's right. Not about leaving, but that he would handle it because he would. He is going to handle this. And in that moment, as he's thinking to himself, Caroline is mortified, seeing his bloody clothes through her tears, and she starts to frantically ask what's going on. Is my sister dead? And Charles tells her that she's being tended to in the drawing room. Don't worry, the bleeding has stopped. She's okay and she's in good hands. Her life is in no danger. But as he says that, Charles wonders how much of that he actually believes. He saw the bleeding stop, but is she really okay? But he reassures her. And he tells one of his servants to lead her to one of the guest rooms, knowing that he cannot let Caroline see what's happening. And she gets ushered to a room. Then one of the servants tells him that Dr. Graham, which is his family doctor, his actual doctor, has arrived. And he's kind of like thinking, oh shit, and runs to the drawing room to see if Hazelby is still there. And as he opens the door, he hears, what was that? And he sees Augusta awake, pointing at the air, but she's alone. He looks at her, she looks at him, she gasps, recognizing him, and faints. He asks around in the hallway if anyone saw Hazelby leave, but they just shake their head. They didn't see anyone. And as that's happening, Dr. Graham gets ushered into the hallway. Charles explains the situation. You know, there was a carriage accident, Augusta was bleeding, and a doctor in the neighborhood helped. Her sister is upstairs, uninjured. And Dr. Graham is like, all right. And then he goes to examine Augusta, who has fainted, and sees that there are no signs of a wound ever even being there, other than the blood. There's no bandages, no signs of any attempts to stop any type of bleeding. And he asks, what exactly did the doctor do? Charles kind of shrugs slightly. I didn't see. I let him do his work while I stepped out. The doctor is like feeling her head and once again sees no physical sign of any blunt force trauma. What was this doctor's name? And Charles says, Dr. Benson, and decides to lie. And the doctor's just like, huh, I've never heard of him. I think I'd like to meet him sometime. And Charles is just like, yeah, totally. And the doctor eventually heads out to check on Caroline. And Charles is kind of just standing there wondering to himself if it was a wise decision to lie and protect Dr. Hazelby. And if you're wondering, he did indeed pass his deception check. But he's like, should I be protecting Hazelby? He doesn't know the man, but he feels almost indebted to him to keep this situation private. So he speaks to Dr. Graham one last time, right before he's about to leave. And the doctor says, the case of Lady Augusta is quite peculiar. You say he was Dr. Benson? Do you know where I might find him? I really do want to know what exactly it was he did to her. And Charles is just like, oh God. I was really hoping he would leave it alone by now. And he once again resorts to lying. He says, I think he mentioned living on the outskirts of the city. And Charles rolls a nat 20 on his deception. Dr. Graham nods and leaves with no further questions. And Charles is just feeling relieved that he believed him and didn't recall that he told him Dr. Benson was a neighborhood doctor. Thank goodness for the nat 20 deception. Editing Lauren here. Just in case you missed it, you should know that the audio for episode 3 is already out on my Patreon and YouTube memberships. So if you can't wait another few months, because these take really long to make, you can check out my Patreon or memberships. I'm going to be uploading audio only stuff there while I work on visualizing everything. And in the future, I'm even going to upload some free stuff on YouTube so that you can actually see some of the content before you subscribe to anything, so you're able to better gauge if Patreon or memberships is worth it for you. So back to the video. So let's go back to Eleanor, who surprises Humphreys as he opens the door, and she barges through. He calls after her, but she runs past him, heading straight to her dad's room. She slams the door open to his room and finds that not only is it empty, but her father's books and writings aren't there either. And Humphreys finally catches up to her, and he is like, Miss Thorne, I was trying to tell you that your father is in the dining room. Where is he? And Humphreys is like, ugh. He stands there, unamused, looks at her up and down, notices the clothes, and chooses not to say anything, offended at being interrupted. He kind of flattens his clothes and scoffs. He's in the dining room. And she's like, huh? Doing what? What else? Eating. And she says, but he never eats there. He's actually out of his room, not reading, just eating. And he's like, well, he's reading, but it's just the newspaper. Eleanor heads over there, and upon reaching the dining room, she sees her father dressed up very nicely. He's wearing even nicer clothes than the ones that she stole and is still currently wearing. And he also looks to be a bit pampered up in terms of his hair and just general appearance. And Eleanor succeeds on the perception check and notices that he is preparing to go out. He's looking forward to it. She storms in and says, I really hope that you're not actually getting ready to leave the house for once, because I have some questions to ask you about your studies. Frederick looks up from his newspaper with a twinkling excitement in his eyes. You've never been interested in them before. What changed? And she starts to yap. I always thought it was gibberish, but now I have a good reason to be interested because, you see, there was a carriage accident and some horse was freaking out. And it was actually Whitebrick's carriage, but don't worry, the Earl's alright because he wasn't there. But his daughters were, and well, Augusta is badly injured and Charles took her back to Wentworth House. Caroline was there too, but she was fine. Anyway, I touched the wreckage and I felt something and it like zapped me. It zapped me. It just felt really abnormal and I just can't really put it into words. And while Eleanor is word vomiting, Frederick looks at the servants around them, and even Benison is there looking frazzled by what she's saying. Frederick suddenly stands up, the sound of the chair scraping the floor finally shutting Eleanor up, and he simply says, let's talk about this in my study, shall we? So they are walking to his study, which is connected to the library. Eleanor starts to ask some questions already, but Frederick stops her and he says, hold on to your questions. We don't want the servants to think that we're both insane. Eleanor hears that and is instantly racked with guilt. It's the type of guilt that comes when you find out that a person has been fully aware of what people say about them behind their back. Eleanor's guilt specifically comes from her quiet agreement with what people say about her dad. And she kind of just simmers in that guilt the rest of the way and stays quiet. When they finally arrive at the study, Frederick just lights up. He obviously looks tired. He probably didn't get enough sleep. I mean, he is just a husk of himself. But as he begins to speak, there's a notable hint of excitement in his voice. There's just a glimmer, like a twinkle in his eyes. Eleanor, thankfully, passes the insight check to fully notice all of this, and you would think that that should feel good for her to see her dad in such a good mood, but it actually just makes that previous guilt that I talked about feel even worse. So Frederick says, you said you felt something on the carriage? And Eleanor is like, yeah, when I touched it, it was like a shock through me. I don't know what it was, but it was scary and it felt evil. And she's waving her hands around and gesturing as she paces and talks. And Frederick kind of starts to murmur to himself like, okay, a shock through touch. And he starts to rummage through his messy desk, looking for something. He says, I might be able to find something about this. I just have to find it. Let's see. And he starts to look through and even looks through the shelves. And Eleanor just goes on. So you're saying this might actually be magic? I mean, I'm just assuming that it is because it was abnormal and felt magical. And it was like a zap, just like a very slight zap that felt almost electric. And Eleanor just keeps going on. She continues to yap, and Frederick's rummaging becomes slightly frantic. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? And he slowly begins to feel the panic of when you lose something important to you. And okay, Frederick is very similar to me, okay? I can relate to this so much. I am guilty of this panicky and frantic behavior when I lose something, and I think maybe a lot of you can relate too. If you haven't already been able to tell, I have poured a lot of myself into Frederick. Sometimes you just kind of lose control of your senses when this panic sets in. But Eleanor does not catch on. She fails the insight check, and she is too invested in her own yapping to really notice anything. She says, oh my god, I just wanted my day to be exciting, but discovering magic? What if I become obsessed with it, like you. She is shocked by her own words. She stops pacing and looks at her dad, kind of checking, did he hear that? Realizing that she said something out of line. She looks to see if he heard her, but she notices that he wasn't even really listening to her. He's too preoccupied with finding this book. Frederick says, maybe I left it in my room, and he starts to head for the door. And Eleanor is unpredictable, so I had to consult the dice to see what she would do here. Unfortunately, Eleanor is not concerned with helping her dad find his book. Instead, she wants to get her answers. She blocks the way and says, calm down. Will you please just give me an answer? Were you even listening to me? And Frederick says, I just need to find it. And he tries to nudge her out of the way. And I treated this like a shove, a contested strength check. And, well, it did not go well for Miss -3 strength Eleanor, okay? And guess what? Frederick got a nat 20. To make things interesting, what he intended to be just a slight nudge turns into a push. And she ends up slamming into a cabinet that was near the door. And she takes 4 bludgeoning damage as she yelps in pain. And 4 damage is kind of a lot because she's level 1. This could have gone way worse. Frederick is shocked at his own actions and he's like, oh my god, I didn't mean to. Are you hurt? And he starts to check up on her, like how a father would. Eleanor feels the sting of pain in her arm and she thinks, like, man, this is gonna be a nasty bruise. And she's grabbing her arm and she looks to her father, whose face is now filled with guilt. And I would say that she's gotten pretty familiar with guilt during these past few minutes. And so in this moment, she now feels pity. She doesn't want him to feel any more guilty than he already does. And she looks at her father and sees a man who has lost so much of himself. She sees someone who so badly missed the stormy waves of war that he chose to drown in peaceful waters. She sees someone who became obsessed with the pursuit of what everyone had assumed was fiction. Yet after today, she had found herself wondering the same thing that her father did. Was magic real this entire time? Was he right? And so with her arm throbbing in pain, she decides to lie, not wanting her dad to feel any worse. And she says, I'm fine. And wishing to hopefully distract him, she asks, so what are you looking for? Maybe I could help. I might have seen a book somewhere. And he says, no. Never mind the book. It's probably just somewhere here. I probably misplaced it. And she tries again to get answers. So will you answer my questions then? At least just one. Do you truly believe that magic is real? Eleanor looks to her father for the answer that she's been waiting for this entire time, and he says, of course it is. What do you think I've been doing this entire time? And he puts a gentle hand on her arm, still worried that she's hurt. And his expression turns serious. But it's dangerous, Eleanor. There are people who don't want us to know. And she's like, wait, what? What do you mean? I would tell you more, but I have to go. It's almost time for me to go meet your mother. And Eleanor's heart sinks upon the mention of her mother. What? It's useless, right? You can't just keep chasing after her. She doesn't want to rekindle anything. And Frederick pauses for a moment and thinks about it, but chooses not to acknowledge her words. Instead, he very gently moves her out of the way of the door, and turning back one last time, he looks to her and says, those suit you, finally acknowledging her attire. And she's kind of taken aback, remembering that she stole his clothes and is wearing them, but she also kind of flashbacks to part of her childhood where she broke the rules and Frederick actually disapproved and she was scolded. But now he looks almost proud of her. She didn't see disappointment on his face, but instead saw a slight smile. And she is overwhelmed with everything that just happened. She can't seem to focus on anything, so she just stays quiet as he leaves. And once she's finally alone in the room, she basically just drops herself onto the seat that is next to his desk. And she starts to think back on the obvious dark circles under her dad's eyes, and she thinks about the glint of hope in his eyes when she told him she was interested in magic, and she thinks about the excitement that she saw when he mentioned her mother, the same woman who left him. She's just overcome with guilt because she thinks about what he said about magic and wonders, who doesn't want them to find out about it? Am I actually believing that this is real? Oh my god, I have to tell Charles. And as she's thinking that, she hears the door open and turns to see Humphreys, who is holding a platter with a note on it. He lowers it to her and she takes it, opens it, and reads on a tiny little note, on a tiny little card. I've discovered something you'll want to know. I'll pay you a call soon. From C. Zooming out from that scene, looking into the room of her dad's study, is a tiny little fly with big doe-like eyes. And that is it for episode 2 of Mistwind. Next episode, we'll find out how Charles and Eleanor decide to tackle telling each other what they've discovered about magic. And to mark the beginning of the social season in Queen's Haven, the capital city of Mistwind, they will be attending the famous Alizarin Ball. And who knows what kind of things will happen there. So thank you so much for watching. I can't believe how many of you watched episode 1 and actually got invested. I read all your comments and all I can say is that it's a dream come true to have this community who I can share this story to. If you want more Mistwind content or just want to hear me babble on about D&D, I should have a couple of behind the episode talks available to patrons and members, and possibly extra D&D content there that I just want to talk about but don't have enough time to give visuals to like these episodes. And I do read all my comments, so let me know what you think about this episode and even the other episode. But yeah, I'm going to be taking my time with this passion project because I don't want to burn myself out. So that is it for today, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.